Hey everyone, it's Jeffrey Poston, investor and syndicator. In this free webinar series, we're going to talk about OPM, other people's money, but not the way everyone else is talking about it. I mean, you can go on Facebook or Instagram and see all these advertisements for someone's newfangled method for buying or investing in real estate. But everyone knows that by the time a technique is advertised on TV or on social media, it's too late. All the gurus have already used that method to make their money, and they see the fad endings, so now they're trying to sell the technique online to all the uninformed masses that are following the crowd, trying to buy the latest get-rich-quick fad. That's one of the reasons why I'm not selling anything. This isn't a course on how to use OPM, because before you can use it, you have to actually find it. That's what we're going to talk about in this free webinar series. Because raising money can be a full-time job unless you have automated systems in place to do that. And it's a fact in this business that no one is going to give you their money unless they know you, like you, and trust you. I'm going to show you how to develop a trusting relationship with your investors even if you have no experience and have never rehabbed a house or apartment before. But first, who is Jeffrey Poston and why am I giving away free info? Let me answer the second question first. And there are really 4 reasons why I'm giving away free information. First, as the real estate market continues to change, everyone tries to sell info online at the peak of popularity when everyone's trying to get into the latest craze. But I don't want to be known like that. And when you think about it, finding OPM, other people's money, is essential no matter what stage of the market we're in, and that skill set, if you have it, will outlast any fad. Second, I'm not in the business of selling info. I'm in the business of real estate investing. Third, I know that 2 to 3% of you are accredited investors and might realize you don't have the time or expertise or money to invest solo or run rehabs on your own. So maybe you'll invest with my collective. The other 97% of you might find a couple of golden nuggets in these 8 videos that might help shortcut your investment career and save you from some of the expensive or painful lessons I learned the hard way. It's just my way of giving back to the investment community. So who is Jeffrey Poston? Well, I'm 61, so I have a lot of life experience. I've been an Air Force officer, a laser optics engineer, a senior project manager overseeing $25 million projects, a real estate broker, a rehab investor, a syndicator, and an international #1 best-selling author. Now, after my 20-year stint in corporate America, you could say I'm now a serial entrepreneur. I currently run 5 holding companies and a nonprofit foundation. So way back in the day, some 25, 30 years ago, I came across a guru named Carlton Sheets. I hear he's still in the game, but back then he preached a toolkit approach to investing. He had 50 to 60 different methods for buying properties, and his technique is something that has gotten lost over the years. Nowadays, everyone is buying the latest fad method to acquire properties. Then they go out and try to find properties they can use that new technique on. But I don't think you can force fit one technique on any property you find, because you have to find a property that fits that technique and that has a seller who is motivated to fit that technique and that has a lien holder that also fits. The odds of all that happening in one project are very small. So you then have to find a bunch of properties so you can find the 1 in 10 that fits. That process right there is a full-time job by itself, unless you have a bunch of bird doggers or realtors who are doing the searching for you, in which case you have to train them all on how to use this technique to find properties for you. On the flip side, there are investors who build massive businesses around developing the systems to do all this, but that's not me. Carlton Sheets' process was just the opposite. He said, first you find a property that you can flip profitably, and I use a well-known profit formula, and most investors use something similar. So once I find a potential property, then I open up my financing toolkit and see what tools are in there that will help me acquire that property. It might be a loan or owner financing or other investors or a lease option or a master lease. Or it might be a combination of multiple tools. The goal is no money down, which was the name of the course Carlton taught and sold. But no money down is a misnomer. In every transaction, you need money. It may not be your money, but it has to be somebody's money, other people's money, which is why we're here today. Over the last 25 to 30 years, I've used derivatives of Carlton's techniques so much it's almost automatic for me now. I open up my toolkit and see if my top 5 favorite tools will fit a new project that I find. If not, I'll pull out other tools and see what fits and get creative. For me, that's all part of the offering process, and I've gotten extremely comfortable finding a project not knowing exactly how I'll finance it, but always knowing that I'll find the way. In fact, every project I've bought in the last 10 years has been with OPM. It's not as hard as it may seem once you develop a comfortable OPM mindset and learn a variety of tools. Then you simply develop the sustainable business systems to find and manage OPM. But you've got to develop some inertia first. You have to confront your fear of asking people for their money. That was really hard for me at first, but the only way to do that is to just do it. In this free webinar series, we'll talk about how to identify what kind of OPM you need, whether it's equity investors, private lenders, banks, etc., how to find OPM sources with automatic ads and lead generating funnels, and then how to cultivate your OPM sources with autoresponders, a cool website, videos, and free information. Then we're going to talk about leverage, who has it, how to get it, how to use it, even if you're a novice investor. We'll also discuss how to handle multiple investors even when they're far more experienced than you, as well as lender tricks to watch out for that could cost you thousands of dollars and tons of frustration. And then we'll wrap up with a couple of my most painful lessons learned and some project case studies involving OPM. So, let's get started. So what kind of OPM do you need? Well, in my mind, there are 4 primary types of OPM sources: equity investors, private lenders, residential or commercial banks, and institutional lenders like hedge funds or family offices with millions to deploy, organizations like that. Loan brokers tend to be the gatekeepers for those last 2, and we'll get to the question of do you need a broker in a moment. Equity investors are folks with money to invest. They're not lenders, and they certainly aren't in the game to make 6 or 8%, or even 12%. They're risk takers. They're excited about the prospect of sexy quick flips, and they're in the game for 20 to 30% return on investment, called ROI. They don't get liens as security, but they share in the potential upside of a flip, the net profit of a project, also called equity, which can be potentially huge if you pick the right project and manage the rehab to completion properly. On the other hand, they can also share in the net loss if things go wrong with the project. So their risk is high, but their potential return is also high. Private lenders, also called hard money lenders, tend to be more conservative, and they put their money to work consistently and in multiple projects. They get monthly or quarterly loan payments, which are far less than an equity share, but they get liens as security for their money, so their risk is much lower than equity investors. Most people, at some point, have gotten a bank loan for a house, usually to live in. As an investor, though, you will tend to approach commercial banks. There are local banks and credit unions that lend to businesses and investors, and you can find these through your personal network. But if you have a loan broker, then your source of commercial bank loans opens up drastically because a broker has access to lender databases where they can find specific banks or hedge funds or family offices that seek to lend on specific types of projects. So a broker can help match you with the right national commercial or institutional lender for your project. I only include brokers as an option here because they will likely find and market to you as your internet presence expands through your own marketing campaigns. You probably won't start your investment career with big national institutional lenders, but you may need them when you start looking at house portfolios or apartment projects. Now, this is not a course on SEC rules or regulations, so you have to be careful with equity investors. Consult your attorney. It's easy to get cocky in this business when everything is going well and your investors are making 20% ROI. But your first loss will humble you real quick, and if you're skating the line of what might violate SEC rules, a single complaint can take down your entire company and all your projects. Get an attorney to help you navigate SEC rules and to help you with asset protection. From what I've heard, though, you're probably safe from Securities Exchange Commission issues if you're dealing with lenders because you're actually on opposite sides of a transaction. That is, the lenders get a lien for security and their return on investment is not related to your performance or how you manage the project. Simply put, they get paid before you. Things become fuzzy with equity investors, though, because their returns do depend on your performance, and that might require compliance with SEC rules. Raise money the right way. Consult your attorney. Now, I always get asked some variation of, why in the world would you use a hard money lender and pay 12% instead of a 6 or 8% bank loan? Well, There are a few scenarios where hard money might be appropriate. If I need money fast, I might consider expensive hard money because they can usually close faster than banks. Banks typically make you qualify for a loan: income, expenses, assets, liabilities, etc. But a private hard money lender is more likely solely interested in the asset in question. A bank really doesn't want to repossess your property if you can't pay. But a private lender is more likely to be willing and able to quickly repossess. Another scenario where I'd consider hard money is if the project is small or a quick flip, or if I knew I had a refinance loan waiting in the wings for me to finish the rehab. I could use hard money as a bridge to acquire and rehab the project, then refinance out of that high interest. I know 12% sounds huge when it comes to interest, but if you're only using the money for 4 to 6 months, and if the interest payments for that money is in your budget, then it can be a useful tool. Now let's talk about the different types of projects that match up well with different types of OPM. Normally, when people refer to other people's money, they're talking about other real people, other investors, not banks or institutions. And most people understand flips. You buy it, you rehab it, and you sell it. This is what other people, other investors, expect from a quick flip. Personally, when I'm doing a house rehab, I like to pay all cash for it. I can close fast, I don't have to make monthly payments, and I don't have to answer to a lender if I need to sell on terms. This works well for what I call bread and butter flips. 3 to 4 bedrooms and 2 baths, something that a majority of buyers can afford. Not too cheap, not too expensive. When I find a project like this, I can usually raise a couple $100,000 by an email with a couple of follow-up calls. So a good list of equity investors is essential for these kinds of flips. But if you're rehabbing an apartment that'll cost $1 million to buy and $500,000 to rehab, then raising $1.5 million is a bit more challenging. So I'll hit up one of my commercial lenders who will give me a 90% purchase loan plus a 100% rehab loan. There's a lot of those in today's market in mid-2019. So now all I have to do is raise 10% of $1 million or $100,000, and I'll get that from a private hard money lender or from equity investors. Of course, the 100% rehab loan doesn't come to me upfront in all cash. They reimburse me in increments, so I have to raise, say, 20 to 25% of the rehab cost from OPM investors, and then I keep getting reimbursed by the lender. So in total, I'd have to raise a couple $100,000 or a little more, and I know that's well within the capabilities of my investor pool. Or maybe I'll use a loan with owner financing. I'll just reach into my financing toolkit and see what tools I have that fit the property. Here's a couple of examples. I recently tried to buy a rehab with seller financing, and I told the seller with full transparency that I was going to raise the rehab money from another investor and split the profit with him. So that seller volunteered to be that investor. So I got the house for $120,000 with zero down owner financing, and the owner wired me $30,000 for the rehab. It was an accidental home run that I got only because I was fully open and honest with the seller. We sold it for $235,000, and he made 32% ROI. And I got a hefty payday, and I made $6,000 for my charity foundation. I had another house rehab project where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And when it was time to sell, we were going to have to take a loss of over $50,000 or a negative 9% ROI. Turns out, I had another investor in my collective who was an absentee owner bleeding $6,000 a month on a car lot. So we worked out a complicated 5-property 1031 exchange. I had to get buy-in from 13 investors and 4 lenders, but I dug deep into my toolkit and made it happen, and we both avoided taking losses. Now, 3 years later, we're selling all those assets with profit. Again, the primary factor in success was full, open, and honest communication with my investors, so they went along with the adventure not knowing exactly if they'd make profit or not, but they trusted me, and things turned out well. In summary, small, quick flip projects under a couple $100,000 fit well with equity investors. Small apartments up to a couple of million fit well with local commercial banks, though you might have to involve some equity investors or private lenders for the down payment and rehab cash. When you get into larger projects over a couple of million, then you're probably going to have to use a loan broker to find funding on the national stage of large institutional investors like family offices, hedge funds, or insurance funds. My recommendation is to continue to involve with the economy. Never get too attached to one tool in your toolkit, or one type of project, or one type of OPM. Always remain flexible and quick to pivot, and expect change in lenders or projects or the economy. After all, it's mid-2019 right now, and we know a recession is coming in 2 years more or less. So be ready, stay flexible, and check out this segment that I provide to my investors on how my collective is going to invest in the coming recession. So check out this chart. Like many that can be found on the internet, it's a standard representation of the 4 quadrants of the real estate market cycle. Just do a Google search for real estate market cycle, and a bunch of these will pop up. Now here's the same chart with the dates on it from the last recession. 2005 is widely regarded as the peak of the last cycle, the bubble, right here. And this point here, 2007, has been defined as the official start of the recession, according to the experts, while this point here, 2009, is defined as the end of the recession. But guess what? Nobody knew this was actually the end of the recession exactly at that point. We had to get to this point to see enough economic improvements to verify that the recession had in fact ended. And guess what else? I'm cruising along through life buying house flips when the recession was starting right here because nobody told me what I'm telling you right now. In fact, I bought a flip right here, then put it back on the market right here. And guess what? It didn't sell. So don't do what I did. Don't buy flips in a recession. Now I got lucky because I figured out how to hold on to that house for 9 years and even sold it at a tiny profit. But there's a ton of folks out there who were just like me 10 to 12 years ago. And by the time I figured out what was happening, we were here in the market cycle. And I bought several flips from banks and from investors who held on until they ran out of money to finish their projects or they had to short sell their rehab loans. Now I was ignorantly buying house flips in the recession and still made money. Just think how much more money we could have made if we knew then what we know now. So here's what I think will happen in the next few years. I'm thinking we're right here in the market cycle, real close to the peak. And this is where banks and appraisers will start to realize we're heading into a recession, and then it will become real hard to resell our flips in the middle of 2020. At the end of 2020 or the beginning of 2021, we'll be right here at the official start of the recession. And a year or two later, the recession will be over right here. Most people will feel the economic pain in this time frame. But not us, because we're ready and we are armed with knowledge. We will have our last flips sold right here, and we'll start buying cash flow rehab apartments in this region here. We'll ride out the recession, getting quarterly dividends from our properties, and right here, we'll start looking for more house flip bargains, but not individual houses this time. We'll be scouring the banks to buy their failed loan portfolios. And right about here in the next recovery, we'll start selling those houses and apartments, and then we'll retire. Okay, now here's the age-old debate. Do you find the project first or do you get the money first? My answer is get the money first. Let me explain. Unless you have a lot of experience and a strong track record, it might be hard to get investors to actually send you money before they even see what project they're investing in, though sometimes you will. But sometimes it's not about getting their cash in hand, it's more about getting them to commit to sending their money. Either way, they have to trust you. Because as I always say, it's not about the project, it's about the project manager. If they trust you, they'll give you their money and you won't have to sell a project to them. Here's my evolution, and this is where you want to be as your career advances. But keep in mind, I'm not trying to run 100 projects a year or build a massive business around rehabs. When life or the economy changes, I want to keep my company lean and quick to pivot. That's how I survived the last recession. If you have a massive company with offices and employees and big overhead, a sudden political shift or economic change can cause a lot of pain. I'm not looking to make millions of dollars just for the sake of making money. I just need enough to fuel my nonprofits. That's my goal in life. I have a comfortable lifestyle, and the rest of the profit goes to my investors. Anyway, back to the question, project first or money first? I have a huge list of investors, 5 to 10% of whom are active at any given time. So I know that when I find a project, some of them will send their money right away after I outline the details. Why? Because they already trust me. They've done their due diligence on me, they've seen my track record, or they've invested with me before. While we can't predict the future, my collective project's average ROI for investors has been 34% for the last 5 years. In my view, anything over 20% is a home run. So my investors know chances are good they'll do well with me. Because remember, it's not about the project, it's about the project manager. Your investors aren't investing in a project even though they might think they are. Because there's a bazillion projects out there. They're investing in you because they trust you. And I have a strong referral system too. I haven't actually gone out looking for projects in 3 years. I have a few realtors who send me projects because they know if it fits my formula, I can raise the money to buy it. And folks in my network know they'll get a referral fee for bringing me a project if I buy it. This is where you want to be in your career. You can't spend all your time managing projects and running around looking for the next project and looking for more money. You must have systems in place to automate as much of this as possible. Have a published policy of giving a referral fee to anyone that brings you a project, and have the title company pay them by check at closing. By the way, I also pay a 2% referral fee if someone introduces me to an investor that invests in my collective. Have a reputation of always paying your contractors because they will bring you projects too. Give them a referral fee or let them work on the project without competing for it, as long as their price is reasonable. Invest in a lead generating funnel system that finds investor leads for you on automatic pilot, and connect that to an autoresponder that can send out an email drip campaign of emails and free info videos to develop a relationship on autopilot. I've been using this kind of lead generation system for over 10 years, and I never have to cold call for investor money. At the end of every email I send out, I say, when you're ready, let's grab coffee and talk business. I literally have people that have been on my list for months or years, and then out of the blue, I'll get a phone call from someone saying, okay, I'm ready for that coffee. So here's my approach to raising money for projects. When a cool project hits my inbox, I do some quick calculations to see if it will be profitable. If so, I'll send out an email to my collective investors with the preliminary details just to see who's interested. It'll go something like this. I have an apartment rehab project that could be fast and profitable. If we flip it after the rehab in about a year, we'll make about 18 to 25% ROI. If we have to hold it for cash flow, we'll make about 8% annually, with the goal to sell it in 5 to 7 years with an IRR, that's what we call a multi-year ROI, of about 18%. Risk is low, so let me know if this is a project you can invest in, and then I'll get it under contract. During due diligence, I'll send you a detailed financial analysis, and if you approve, we'll collect funds 1 week before closing. Okay, so let's break this down. I send out the query to determine the level of interest. I don't ask them to send over money yet because they might have to sign some forms first. Or I might be getting a commercial loan or a residential rehab loan. So I don't know yet exactly how much I'll have to raise. But at the beginning, I'm just looking for a verbal commitment from investors. Then I get the project under contract, do my due diligence, and 1 week before closing, I'll have investors wire over their funds. Why 1 week before closing and not at closing? Well, I've learned the hard way that what investors want to do might be a little different from what they actually can do. Leading up to closing, I'm in constant contact with the investors that have committed. And if I need $200,000, then I'm shooting to raise $400,000. If I don't get all the funds during that week before closing, I still have time to modify the contract to get some extra time. And if I'm raising more than I need, if an investor can't perform or dallies, they'll miss the boat and have to wait for the next project. This is a good technique to manage investors that feel they need to be in control or ask a lot of last-minute questions. It always comes as a surprise to them when I call up and say, thanks, but I have all the funds I need for this project, but I'll call you first on the next project. That helps them move a little faster next time. But let's go back to the trust issue. Why do they trust me? Is it because of my high average ROI? No, not really. Though that's a factor because a quick look at my website reveals my entire 28-year track record. But over the weeks, months, or years that they've been on my email list or involved in my projects, I've always promised full transparency and constant communication. I'm honest. I do what I say I'm going to do, and when I can't, or when things go wrong with projects, I don't cover it up. I tell investors what the problem is and what my plan is to recover. So, now that we've discussed how I engender trust, let's quickly go over the mechanics of how I find and cultivate investors. Now, the fundamentals of finding leads hasn't changed in 40 years. You advertise, give free info to get them on your list, follow up, then convert them to clients. I used a manual autoresponder funnel 10 years ago and advertised on Craigslist. And it worked great for a few years, but recently I migrated my funnel to ClickFunnels with Active Campaign as my autoresponder. As you know, I advertise on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Now, personally, I think free info is the key. You have to give your leads something useful to sign up and stay on your list. When I was a realtor, I'd send bi-weekly emails with economy tips and flips for them to buy. Now, as a syndicator, I produce free webinars, lessons learned, case studies, and hot bargain projects for investors to participate in. Your goals may be different from mine. You may be looking to sell information online, and that's cool too. My specific goal is to sift through all of my investor leads and pull out the accredited investors. Out of all the investor leads on my list, only 3% are likely accredited. But if I have 10,000 leads on my list, then that 3% equals 300 potential accredited investors. And I know from experience that 10 to 20% of those will eventually invest with me. The other 97% of my leads can keep getting free information from me, and that's perfectly fine. They're not competitors, and I'm happy to help them succeed. Here's a quick review on developing trust. Giving free, useful information shows you know what you're talking about. No hassling phone calls or attempts to sell anything. Full transparency. Full track record on the website, with losses if you have any, because no one is perfect over the years. About me videos from the heart and testimonials. Develop your story. For example, you've heard my story in my intro video about how my executive business coach challenged me to do more than just chase money, and she inspired me to form my charity foundation that funds 2 healing centers, one for victims of life trauma and one for recovery after cancer treatment. Tell your story, because life isn't only about making money. It's what you do with that money that counts. Okay, let's wrap up. Identify the type of OPM that fits the type of projects you do. If you're starting out, it'll probably be a combination of loans and equity investor funds, though hard money has a place in some projects too. Design and implement an automated funnel system that attracts and cultivates a steady flow of investor leads who will call you when they're ready. Develop trust through your experience and full transparency and disclosure. In the next video, we'll talk about leverage. Whoever has it will dictate the primary terms of the transaction. We'll also talk about how to handle investors or private lenders who are far more experienced than you. And I'll give you some tips on what to say when they require you to have skin in the game. So I'll see you in the next video. And don't forget, life is good. Hey everyone, it's Jeffrey Poston again. In the last video, we discussed the different types of OPM, other people's money, and how each applies to different types of projects. Now let's talk about leverage. Specifically, what is it and who has it? Because the one who has the leverage has the most power or control in a project or negotiation. And when your investors think they have leverage over you, and if you give in to their demands, they own you. It's just like a tenant who begs you to let them pay late. If you give in, even once, they own you forever. Remember, everything is a negotiation. When you learn that simple fact about the business of investing, you have increased your mental leverage. But leverage and experience are 2 completely different things. You will always come across investors or private lenders who are more experienced, and some believe their experience entitles them to some involvement or control of your project. I've been doing rehabs for 27 years and syndicating projects with multiple investors for 10 of those years, and I still meet more experienced investors, but I never fight with them for control. My system of cultivating investors pre-programs them on autopilot to understand that they are passive investors without any control or authority in a project. In the same way, money is not leverage. For example, if you have a $200,000 purchase rehab project and one investor puts in most or all of the cash, it's not unreasonable for them to require some control over how the money is managed or spent. They might ask for visibility on the bank account, or dual check signing authority, or approval of the contractor's bids. How will you handle them, especially if they have more experience than you? In my mind, there are 2 topics up for negotiation here. The first is the investor's return, or ROI. And the second is control of the project. So here's my recommendation. If I have one investor on a project, or one who puts in the lion's share of the funds, I'll consider giving him or her a little extra share of net profit, or maybe an interest dividend on their money. After all, that's time and energy I don't have to spend raising more money. On the other hand, if any investor insists on partial control of the project, just say no and stick to your position. Here's what I always say. There can only be one bus driver, period, hard stop. It's up to you to remind all investors that they're passive investors only. They have no control or authority over the management of the project, and they've signed up to that in the property holding company's operating agreement. I'm comfortable with this approach because I've been doing this for 27 years. I'm a professional project manager, and sticking to a budget and schedule is what I do best. Trust me, I've been in this situation before, and having more than one manager on a project rarely works well and can be very stressful. So I will refuse an investor's money rather than having them involved in control of the project. There are no exceptions to this policy. On a related topic, no matter how experienced you are, you're going to have to deal with the question, how much skin in the game will you have? Especially from equity investors, but also from private lenders. I have a variety of responses to that question. First, every investor's capital in a company is confidential, including mine. Second, if you're like me running 7 projects, there's no way you can personally put money in each project. Third, there's a big difference between the deal provider, that's you or me, and the cash provider, and I always draw a distinction between the two roles. The deal provider finds and manages the project, and the cash provider funds the project. It's as simple as that. Here are some typical questions investors throw at me and how I might respond. Jeffrey, how much money are you putting in? You mean this particular project or all 7 projects that I'm running right now? This response helps them to see I'm running a company that manages multiple projects, and that gives me more perceived leverage. Another question might be, Jeffrey, I don't feel comfortable investing in your project if you don't have skin in the game. My response might be, well, I've built this company from 3 to 37 investors in 5 years, and we've moved X million dollars in real estate through the company in that time. And I personally have more invested in this company than my top 3 investors combined because I keep reinvesting my share of the profit back into the company. Or I might say something like, well, sir or ma'am, we each have our role in the project. You're the cash provider, and I'm the deal provider, meaning I combine investor funds, then find and manage the project, and handle all problems and develop contingencies to make sure I don't overrun the budget so you get your expected ROI. And I personally guarantee all the loans on all my projects. That's my role and contribution. Yours is providing the cash. Is that okay? And yes, I actually have these speeches memorized because I know someone is going to ask me this question someday. Now, if you're just starting out with one project, you may have to show you're putting money into the project. Hopefully, you'll soon graduate to operating a business. Then you'll be the deal provider and your investors will be the cash providers. When they learn to trust you, they'll accept their role in your business. That is your leverage. Here's another question you'll have to answer. How much are you getting paid? Now, I believe full transparency and complete disclosure is extremely important here. Your profit share and/or your fees must be disclosed in the operating agreement. Everyone agrees up front that you should get paid a fair share for your work. But what happens when a project doesn't yield the ROI they were expecting? Having your compensation in the operating agreement will avoid unpleasant conversations later, I guarantee. Here's another question regarding leverage. Your investor may ask, do I get a deed or lien on the property? And the answer is absolutely yes, but only if they're a lender. If they're an equity investor, which means their sole compensation is a share of equity or net profits on resale, then they will be listed in the operating agreement, but they won't get a lien. In other words, investors can either be a lender or an investor, but not both. The lender's risk is low because they get a lien for security. The equity investor risk is higher, but they get potentially a much higher return. So what happens if a big money investor wants interest, like a lender, and a share of the net profit, like an equity investor? That can make earnings very complicated because as a lender, they'll want a deed or a lien on the property, but a lien or the associated promissory note can never contain an unspecified amount, such as the following. Lender receives his or her principal amount of $100,000 plus 8% annual interest plus 25% of net profit on resale. Why is this a problem? Well, a lien is leverage, and I guarantee you if the net profit on the resale is not what you or they expect, you're going to have to fight at closing because they won't sign a lien release unless they get what they feel they deserve. I've learned this very painful lesson the hard way. If they have a lien, they have all the leverage, and you have zero leverage, and you can't close a sale or refi until you pay them what they want. Of course, that's fine if they're only a lender. They get their capital plus interest as documented in the lien, and they are then legally required to sign the lien release. But if there's an amount of compensation that is not clearly specified in numbers, like a 25% share of net profit, but the exact amount of net profit is not known until closing, then they are not legally required to sign a lien release until that amount is agreed upon. So my hard and fast rule is a lender gets a lien. If they also want a share of net profit, they do not get a lien. Instead, their loan and net profit share are defined in the operating agreement. Why is this important? When you're selling or refinancing a property, title can't convey until a lien is paid and a release is signed. If a lien clearly specifies the amount to be paid, the lien release cannot be withheld. If a payment is specified in an LLC's operating agreement and there is no lien, then the property can still be conveyed, and you and the investor must then settle any dispute outside of closing. In the case of a lien, the lender has all the leverage over you in a dispute. In the case of the operating agreement, you have the leverage over the investor. You'll hear me say this many times in this webinar. Consult your attorney. Pay $1,000 for an upfront document review by your attorney and save thousands later settling disputes. Now, ideally, you really want investors who are experienced and understand the risks. Investors who trust you and are easy to get along with. But sometimes you'll encounter stubborn investors. Here's how I respond to them. If they say, I won't invest in a project unless I know you have skin in the game, I'll say, that's not what I'm offering here. I'm offering you an opportunity to be a passive investor and make an ROI of 20 to 30%. Can you work with that? Then there's always the nuclear option, where I'll say, well, sir or ma'am, if you're not comfortable with these terms or how I intend to manage the project or just being a passive investor, then don't give me your money. Of course, you have to be willing to walk away or let them walk away. Trust me, it'll save you massive stress later. It's certainly helpful if you have plenty of other investor prospects interested in your project, but don't close the door on these stubborn investors completely. After they contemplate the loss of a profitable project and the fact that they don't have leverage over you, they may come back around for another project later. So, what's the absolute very best way to have and keep leverage? One of my mentors advised me to always try to raise twice the funds you need. This will keep your project's purchase timeline on track in case an investor or private lender tries last-minute shenanigans or simply can't participate for some reason. If you raise too much money, you simply return the extra and you'll have strong commitments for your next project. In the next video, we're going to discuss why banks and lenders have more leverage than you. After all, a lender's primary two goals are to maximize their return on investment and minimize risk. And we'll discuss several methods they employ that can be unfavorable for us as investors and what we can do about it. So I'll see you on the next video. And don't forget, life is good. Hey everyone, it's Jeffrey Poston again. In the last video, we discussed the topic of leverage and who has it, you or the investor or lender. Despite the old adage that everything is negotiable in real estate, in my experience, leverage or negotiating power is more a factor of experience and track record than anything else. Because these things reduce investor or lender risk of losing their capital, and that's a primary investor concern. Basically, equity investors have little leverage because they're passive investors, and your experience and management skills determine their ROI. On the other hand, large banks and institutional lenders, like hedge funds or family offices, have a lot of leverage because they determine the terms of the loan, and these terms are typically non-negotiable. You either want their money or you don't. You either accept their terms or you don't. Unfortunately for us, because of the lopsided leverage of big lenders, they can, and actually do, change their terms at various points along their due diligence path, up to and including right before closing. Most large lenders are fair and reasonable, but some of their tactics can seem unfair or even disingenuous at times. Recall that large lenders have to satisfy their investors just like you and I do, and their two primary objectives are to maximize ROI and minimize risk for those investors. Now, let me lay out some of the tactics banks will use, and then I'll tell you a story of what happened to me. Large lenders typically reach borrowers like us through intermediaries called loan brokers. Many of them advertise very favorable terms like, we can close in 7 days. But what they really mean is, we can close in 7 days after we do all the preliminary application and due diligence, which can take weeks or months. In other words, they can close in 7 days after the lender gives final loan approval. So be ready for one or more of these tricks to happen. Number 1, sometimes these brokers will charge a non-refundable upfront due diligence fee. The actual banks and lenders don't do this, but the loan brokers who are independent from the banks or lenders do, especially the more established ones. They say it's to pay their CPAs and attorneys, etc., for due diligence and contract fees, and maybe it is for some of that. But what I think it's really for is to get you emotionally and financially hooked, like a down payment or earnest money. I think it's to discourage you from talking with multiple brokers. After all, loan brokers also know the tactics used by lenders. They know the lenders will change their terms as they progress toward loan approval, so they know some applicants will drop out along the process. Charging a fee gives the broker at least minimal compensation when an applicant drops out. And sometimes these brokers will require you to sign an agreement stating that if they bring you a lender, then you owe them their fee, even if another broker brings you the same lender and actually closes the loan. But this isn't a requirement. It's simply protection for the broker because they think they have more leverage than you. And if you sign that agreement, you're giving them that leverage. It's much the same as investors who use multiple realtors to find properties. The realtor who presents your offer and closes the deal gets the compensation. With a loan broker, you can deploy your own leverage, especially if you have a lot of experience and a strong track record. I tell brokers in writing, if you bring the lender and get me to the finish line, then you get your fee. But I won't pay any upfront fees and I won't sign any unconditional compensation agreements. After all, like realtors, there are a bazillion loan brokers in the country, and some are more connected on the national lenders days than others. The good ones will get you to the finish line. Number 2, a lender or bank will issue what is called a term sheet. That's basically a loan pre-approval letter. It'll have favorable terms for your project, but they're only saying, here's what we might be able to do for you. And the letter always states that it isn't a contract or a commitment to fund your project, and that the actual loan commitment will be subject to due diligence about your credit and the project. In fact, sometimes these lenders never produce an actual signed commitment letter. They just proceed toward closing because this gives them the maximum flexibility or leverage to back out or change their terms anytime they want. I've been beat upside the head with this tactic many times, and there's not much that can be done about it except have backup lenders or brokers ready to move if the loan falls through. Number 3, many times a lender will change the terms of a loan a couple weeks into the loan process because of your credit score, project risk, geographical area, or other economic factors. There's nothing inherently devious about this. It's a normal business practice, unless it happens during the last week of closing. Number 4, sometimes the lender will make last day changes to reduce risk. I view these as highly suspect because, guess what? They won't change the interest rate to mitigate risk because that means you'll have to pay more, and 1, you may not be qualified for a higher payment, in which case the lender will have shot themselves in the foot. Or 2, you may have an anger reaction to a higher payment and decide to dump them. They don't want that because they've invested many hours into your loan also. More likely, the terms that they'll change are things like the percent of LTV, loan to value, that they can finance. Or they'll use a smaller percentage of the appraisal. Or other factors, things that reduce the amount of money they have to give you while not increasing your payment. Now, I can't fault banks or other large lenders for needing to reduce risk, but they have solid systems in place to manage loan applicants from start to finish. They know ahead of time exactly what they will need to do during that loan process. They do it every day. They know exactly what they can get away with, in my opinion, assuming they have more leverage than you do, which is usually the case unless you have a track record of multiple successful multi-million-dollar projects. After all, they know everything financially about you, while you know almost nothing about the lender that in many cases will be many states away from you. Best case, you know only what the loan broker tells you, and he or she is solely motivated to get the loan closed and get paid. Remember, the broker gets paid to make the introduction and is not motivated to be on your side or look out for your best interests in a transaction. I had a high-end project in northern New Mexico that should have been one of my most profitable rehab flips ever, but I was plagued with lender problems at the start and at the end. Still, I managed to get all my investors exited with a crazy high ROI, but I could have done without all the stress. Here's what happened. One day before closing the purchase, my primary rehab investor told me he couldn't commit his entire obligated amount for the rehab and that he needed to make 2 installments. Of course, he obviously knew this before that day, but he didn't disclose to me ahead of time that his full funding wouldn't be available, probably because he knew I was talking to other investors and he did not want me to hit them up for the money instead of him. So I had stress staring me in the face. I had already turned down the other investors, and I had already raised the down payment funds, so I had to decide if I should buy the project anyway, even though I didn't have the rehab funds in hand. My thought process was that the project was so potentially profitable, I didn't want to lose it, and I was pretty confident I could raise the rehab funds. So I broke my number 1 rule. Never buy a project unless you have all the funds in hand for the purchase, rehab, and carrying costs. Well, I bought the house, and then I did raise the rehab money from that original rehab investor, but that kicked off 8 months of nonstop financial stress. We expanded the scope of the rehab, and then another investor backed out, so we had to actually stop work while I was stressed about raising more funds. As I look back on this experience, I see exactly where I went wrong. I tell investors all the time, don't get emotionally attached to a project. But I wanted that project too much. And I have to say, when you get cocky in this business, that's when you get your ass kicked. But that wasn't the end of my lesson learned. 6 months later, when it was time to refinance, I had a great loan broker, but the family office lender that she found for me was very aggressive and used many tactics on me. They had a great term sheet proposal. They said they could do a cash out refi, which is what I needed. They said they could close in 7 days, which is what investors like me always want to hear. They quoted me a 7.99% interest-only loan at 75% of the appraised value, which was perfect for me. But 8 weeks into due diligence, they reduced the LTV, loan to value, down to 65% of appraised value. And they never gave me a reason for this. A couple days before closing, they further reduced the LTV to 55%. They said it was because it's a rural property, even though it's only 10 miles from a major city. Then the day before closing, they inexplicably said they couldn't do the cash out. Well, that was a deal breaker for me, so I told them I couldn't do the loan without taking cash out. The next day, they reinstated the cash out, but later that very same day, they said they had to decrease the value of the loan because it had previously been listed for less than the appraised value. I argued the previous price was the before repaired listing price, but they were unwilling to reverse that decision. So now I was going to get 55% of the before rehab value, not the after rehab value, a difference of almost $100,000 in cash to me. So I rejected that lender in a fit of rage accompanied by an expletive-filled email. So let's analyze what happened and what I should have done as a professional investor. That 10-week process took a heavy toll on me. I rode that emotional roller coaster of hope, anguish, new hope, frustration, more hope, and finally betrayal and anger. And I think that lender was counting on me giving in to those emotions and just accepting their final terms. In the end, my anger outweighed my need for the money. I think the lender was just greedy, and I'm pretty sure they thought they had me by the short hairs, which they did, but I'm also pretty sure they didn't expect me to outright reject them the way I did. I think they have a process they use to take advantage of investors. Maybe that's just the way they do business, and I just happened to end up in their crosshairs. Conclusion number 1. They clearly knew of the listing price history of the property when they began due diligence, so that should not have been a surprise to them on the last day. They also knew it fell under their definition of rural property. I think they disclosed those term reductions in a carefully planned effort to manipulate my emotions. You know how we get toward the end. Come on, let's just get this done already. I also think they intentionally pulled back from the cash out just to see if they could get away with it. When I balked, they reversed course. My opinion is that they will push you for as much as they can get away with, then back off at the last second. But they had pushed me one time too many. Conclusion number 2. I was so angry and I felt so cheated and betrayed, I forgot about some of my own negotiation rules. I got emotional. I didn't wait 24 hours to absorb their proposal and to process my own feelings. Instead, I relayed through the loan broker my thoughts about the lender, and unfortunately, I used words I couldn't take back. Here's what I should have done. Rule number 1 in negotiation is to never ever get emotionally invested in the outcome. Always take 24 hours to absorb a proposal and to process your feelings. Discuss the proposal with your advisors to determine a thoughtful counterproposal. Remember, this is just business. Don't do what I did and react in anger. I ended the negotiation by walking away from the table in such a way that neither of us could go back. Consider the larger picture. Try never to have your loan closing tied to a hard contract requirement like a drop-dead date to return investor capital or a purchase agreement. If you are in this situation and the loan doesn't close or is delayed, you may find yourself in the stressful position of needing to give the lender concessions or agreeing to other conditions that will cost you money. Always have a clause in your purchase or sale contract allowing for funding delays. Remember that lenders are business people. Some are nice people and some are cutthroat. Always understand that, whether tactic or trick, this is the game the lenders play to either reduce risk or to gain the upper hand in the transaction. You must do the same. And for all you Trekkies out there, remember what Commander Riker said to Captain Picard when the Enterprise faced down 3 Romulan warbirds. Sometimes you get the bear, and sometimes the bear gets you. It's all about who has the leverage and who doesn't. Still, lenders don't make any money if they don't close your loan, so you always have some leverage. Nobody wins if you walk away from the table, but if you have to walk, do so with grace. And if you do walk, always have a backup plan. Never limit yourself to conversations with only one lender. If you do, then you're just giving them leverage over you. As a result of this painful lesson learned, now I always interview multiple lenders or brokers for a refi or new loan. But never tell lenders that you're interviewing others until they try to change their terms that will significantly impact your goals. If you sequentially talk to one lender at a time, not only are you investing a lot of time in the process, but they know you're less likely to jump ship if you have a closing deadline, especially if you've paid any upfront fees like the appraisal or a survey. And you'll be more likely to accept any last-minute changes the lender throws at you. Again, if they advance unacceptable changes, try telling them, "Let me think about this change for a couple days." Or if the change seems egregious or disingenuous, then you can push back with, "I'm not sure that new term is in my best interest, so let me see what my other lender will do for me." This way, you keep your leverage, and the lender now has to wonder, do you really have other competition for their business? My guess is they will wait for your counterproposal, or they will back down rather than risk losing your business. Remember, lenders don't make any money if they don't lend you money. Just like any other business, there are lenders that are fair and easy to get along with, and there are those that are aggressive. But when you find a lender that makes the magic happen, stick with him or her and don't make them compete for your next business. Use them until they run out of money. In the next video, we'll discuss how to handle multiple investors in a single project. Normally, we raise all necessary funds up front and then start the project. But what if the project is too big for one investor or private lender? I have some tips on how to bring multiple investors into a project. So I'll see you on the next video. And don't forget, life is good. Hey everyone, it's Jeffrey Poston again. In the last video, we discussed the topic of lender tricks or tactics. Now let's talk about investor equity. Let's say you have a loan and you need to raise the down payment and rehab funds. Or maybe you're raising all cash for the purchase and the rehab so that you won't have to rely on a loan and have loan payments. Either way, you may not have a single investor or private lender to put up all the cash needed. If you pursue multiple investors, you certainly can't negotiate terms individually with each investor. That's a logistical nightmare. You'll have to establish fair terms up front and get everyone to agree. That's when you have to step into the role of syndicator. If you have experience in producing profitable deals and achieving strong ROI, and if your investors trust you, this task won't be difficult. Now, assuming your investors understand the project and the risks, if your project is a rehab flip, then your equity investors are likely concerned with 2 main factors: how much they will earn and how soon they will exit. If you're doing a group raise for a long-term cash flow project, like an income-producing apartment, their primary concerns will likely be near-term cash flow, that is, dividends or rental income, long-term exit strategy, and profit share on the resale. Those are the terms you have to sell to everyone as a group. Here's how I do it, and if you have enough leverage, you can do the same. First, I'm going to try to raise twice as much as I actually need. I always assume that at least one investor is going to drop out or won't be able to bring the money before closing. And I don't want the last-minute stress of trying to find additional funds one day before I'm supposed to sign documents. I've been in this stressful situation, and let me tell you, it's not fun. When you're desperate, in danger of losing the project or the earnest money, you make mistakes. That's when you risk giving away more than you should. Raising more than you need will avoid this problem, but it also provides an additional benefit of competition. If your offering is strong, investors will want to avoid being the backup investor and potentially missing out on a high ROI project. Trust me, it's a great position to be in with investors fighting to give you their money. Second, I organize my thoughts and do the math. I don't try to sell the dollar return, I sell the ROI, the return on investment. Remember, equity means what's left after all expenses of the project are paid. The original purchase cost, rehab costs, closing costs, and maintenance, utilities, and holding costs. Equity investors know they aren't getting any monthly payments. They know their return is a percentage of net profit. Now, a return of $20,000 might sound like a lot if you invested $40,000 because that's a 50% ROI. But if you invested $200,000, it's only 10% ROI. So focus on one ROI for everyone, no matter how much they put in. Also, they'd much rather have their ROI in 4 months rather than in 10 months. So a speedy exit on a rehab flip is ideal. Note, I offer an ROI range instead of a number. As you see here, when you plug in the numbers into the profit formula, which I give to all investors up front, I don't want to only give investors a pie-in-the-sky best-case scenario. I also want to give them a more conservative scenario and a worst-case scenario. After all, in 28 years, I've only had a handful of projects go completely according to plan with no problems. So I always say something like, the expected ROI for this project will range from 18 to 26%. Of course, I stack the deck of my sales pitch and quote my 5-year average collective project ROI at 34% because it gives me more credibility. All my projects going back 28 years are fully disclosed on my website. As an example, here's my pitch for Project 203, a real project you can see on my website that I did in the popular ski town of Taos, New Mexico. But beware of a couple of factors. Avoid a slick-talking syndicator who quotes a project ROI as an annualized percentage. This guy or gal might say something like, you'll get a 20% ROI in 4 months, so that's like a 60% annual return. The assumption that you can actually participate in 2 additional projects that year, 3 times 20%, or that you'll actually even get 20% on each is just plain fallacy. Also, investors always ask how much I'm making as the syndicator or project manager, so I just put it in my operating agreements, whether I'm getting a management fee or a share of the net profit like them. I usually use a 50-50 split or a 60-40 split with 60% of the net profit going to my investors. That shows them that they get paid at least as much as me, maybe a little more. And I specify upfront any additional payments or fees that go to me or my company. And when a project sells, I show them the settlement statement as proof. These are excellent tools to build trust. No one will give you their money if they don't like you and trust you. And I don't just promise these things, I put them in writing in the operating agreement of each project. Here are some other tips to help equity investors feel comfortable with the way you do business and so they know you have the business systems in place to protect their funds. Every project gets its own LLC holding company and a separate bank account. Never commingle funds from other projects. Ask your attorney and CPA about this if you have questions. All investors are passive investors. Remember, there can only be one bus driver. If you, as the project manager, decide to share decision-making with investors, there's always the possibility that there will be a disagreement on how to proceed. In my mind, that's a recipe for stress and disaster. Banks and private lenders get liens on the property. Equity investors earn a percentage share of net profit, but they do not share ownership of the property. This is important because when you open a bank account, you have to list all people who own 20% or more of the property. And refi banks always require that 20% owners of the property need to qualify for the loan or provide personal guarantees for loans. At the same time, some investors specifically do not want any property ownership or bank accounts to be registered in their names. Further, if someone shares ownership of the property or the bank account and they get into legal or financial trouble, your property and its bank account might be at risk. Consult your attorney for how to incorporate this into your operating agreement. I write my operating agreements so that investors earn a specified share of future net profit but do not own the actual asset. The holding company, the LLC, is the only owner on title of the property. Investor rights and project manager obligations are also listed in the operating agreement. Make sure every investor gets a chance to review it. It goes without saying that you can't change this document if investors take issue with it, because then you'd have to get buy-in from all the other investors for every change. An investor has a simple choice, and I always tell them, if you don't agree with the operating agreement, don't give me your money. Of course, it helps if you're raising more money than you need, because then you have the most leverage. In addition, no investor has control or authority or oversight of the project or how the funds are spent. That's the definition of passive investor, and that determination has tax implications for you and for your investors. Again, always get an attorney review of your operating agreement to make sure your company and your investors are not at risk, and to make sure you're not violating any SEC rules regarding fundraising. This is important. What you do not know can destroy you. Spend $1,000 up front with an attorney to save thousands more later. One final note about partners, not to be confused with investors. Partners are people with whom we share control and decisions. 30 years ago, a smart attorney advised me, if you need partners, get partners, but if you don't, don't. In full disclosure, I didn't heed that advice way back then. There were 3 of us, and when the disagreement happened, it was 2 against 1, and I was the one. And guess who got voted out of that company? Now I'm 61, so I have a lot of life experience, and I know a lot. But I also know what I don't know. My rule for partnerships is that the partner has to bring a talent or skill set that I don't have or don't have time to learn. I've been offered investor money with the string attached that they have to be a partner in the project management decisions. And I always refuse that money because, you guessed it, there can only be one bus driver. For me, that makes sense because I'm a professional project manager and I know that there aren't too many people who can manage projects as well as I can, and that's my superpower. I stick to the budget like nobody's business, and I manage contingencies. In fact, I haven't overrun a rehab budget in over 12 years. And that's why I have such a high ROI for my investors. You blow your budget and you blow your profit, plain and simple. You might be different though, with different levels of experience. As an example, I have another business in which I have 2 partners that I absolutely trust. One excels in marketing and the other in tech, areas I'm not real strong in. Still, we have an ironclad, attorney-reviewed partnership contract. Call it a business prenuptial agreement. In summary, if you need one or more partners to bring talent that you don't have to your business, just make sure you have a contract in place with duties clearly specified. And if there's just one takeaway from this video, just be sure to have everything reviewed by your attorney. It will prevent lots of headaches later. In the next video, in case study number 1, we'll take a look at a house rehab flip we bought in the depth of the last recession, not knowing we were actually in a recession. And I'll outline the creative financing OPM solution we used not only to avoid taking a loss, but to in fact sell it profitably. So I'll see you on the next video. And don't forget, life is good. Hey everyone, it's Jeffrey Poston again. Now let's talk about buying house flips in a recession. Now let me preface this video by saying there's nothing wrong with buying rehab flips in a recession if you actually know you're in a recession. But you have to be prepared to hold that asset and the mortgage payments, if you have any, for longer than normal because your pool of buyers drops radically during a recession because people just can't get loans. If you're buying flips and you don't know you're in a recession, you're toast. Here's what happened to me. In late 2008, I bought a super bargain foreclosure at less than 50% ARV, after repaired value, also called resale value. I used 3 partners, but I made several mistakes right out the gate. Looking back, I see that I bought the house 9 months before the technical end of the recession, and it would be another year before buyers could start getting loans again. But my project was a higher-end home, and it would be another 3 years before buyers could start getting jumbo loans again. And when I bought the project, I didn't even know we were in a recession. And 2 of my partners were savvy investors, and even they didn't know we were in a recession. Even the bank that gave us the loan didn't know we were in a recession. Clearly, we weren't prepared to hold the property for a year, much less 3 years. Well, I did an excellent 4-month rehab, and I stuck to the budget and put it back on the market in early 2009. But we had no showings and no activity at all because we were in what we later discovered was a severe recession. I couldn't sell it, so I rented it. But the tenant defaulted after 4 months, so I listed it again for rent with no showings for 2 whole months. About that time, I started to realize I was caught in what the media was calling the housing bubble. Here's what I did wrong. In a nutshell, I bought a rehab house flip unaware of economic market conditions. But here's what I did right. I initially bought the project using a holding company LLC, and I documented all 4 investors' stakes and the rehab budget down to the penny. 1 partner got the loan, 1 put in the down payment money, and 2 put in the rehab money. It was clear we couldn't sell it, so I moved into the big 5-bedroom, 4-bath house as caretaker and rented out the rooms to pay the mortgage and expenses. So in late 2009, it looked like we were going to be able to ride out the recession, but then one of the partners went bankrupt, and then we had a 5-year call on the loan, and the loan partner couldn't renew it. Well, the housing market still hadn't recovered sufficiently, so now I was faced with having to do a fire sale or lose the house in foreclosure. Again, I put my creative thinking cap on. 1 project partner had good credit but no money, but I had a bit of money, so she refinanced the house in 2014, and I paid all the cash fees to close. Then we bought out the other 2 investors and paid the new loan partner most of her equity in exchange for getting that new loan. By now, I had a smooth system to keep the rooms rented, and we held the house until the economy recovered enough to sell in 2017. I even made a massive 1% ROI. But that was a major victory compared to the alternative, which was losing our entire investment. I suppose the moral to the story is you can always find a solution to a problem if you don't give up. Keep fighting until you can't. In the next video, I'll share a really awkward lesson learned that happens when you get cocky in this business. It didn't cost me a lot of money, but it cost me time and embarrassment. And it reinforces what a wise person once told me: you don't get what you expect. You get what you inspect. So I'll see you on the next video. And don't forget, life is good. Hey everyone, it's Jeffrey Poston again. I suppose we all get to the point where we can get overconfident, especially on a super easy slam dunk rehab. You know, the kind that fits the investor's profit formula, which is net profit equals the resale price minus 10% closing costs, minus the purchase price, minus the rehab costs, minus holding costs, if any. Basically, you buy it for 50% of the ARV, the after repaired value, also known as expected resale price. And then the rehab cost is 17% of ARV. Then you finish the rehab in 6 to 8 weeks. You know, paint and carpet, maybe some new cabinets and sinks and fixtures. And then you put it on the market and sell it in a day or a week. That's right, you're rocking and rolling, everything's going right, and you handle all the challenges without missing a beat until something happens that threatens to derail the project. Because when you get cocky in this business and think you can't lose, that's when you get your ass kicked. Here's what happened to me, how I fixed it, what it cost me, and how I changed my project management system to avoid problems like this. I was 99% through the rehab process on an easy slam dunk, and then the floor dropped out from under my feet. And instead of selling and closing in a month, It took 8 months. So here's what happened. I had a highly skilled handyman on a small $30,000 rehab that took 7 weeks. He was dependable and trustworthy. He did amazing work, showed me all the receipts, and handled the whole project until the last week. He said he was done, and I trusted him and paid him. But there was still a hole in the wall and a crack in the ceiling that hadn't been repaired. And the heater duct covers in the floor in all the rooms were missing, as were all the light switch covers and outlet covers. Well, I was out of town at the time and had my realtor put the house on the market. Except this was a small market, and all the realtors in that town saw the house during that first week. The house should have sold immediately for a variety of reasons, but it didn't. And the feedback was that the house looked incomplete. Well, I hired someone to finish those repairs, and we sold the house for the expected profit, but in a market that should have taken only 1 month to sell it, it took 8 months. And we all know that time is money. So here were my lessons learned. First, we have to be aware of human psychology and needs. You know how contractors are. When a project is wrapping up, they're thinking about the next project, so they won't be unemployed for long. Maybe that's what happened here. And they all say something like, "My word is my bond," or "I guarantee my work," or "If you find something wrong, I'll fix it." And they all mean well, but when they're gone, good luck getting them to come back and fix their mistakes for free. Well, a wise investor once told me, "You don't get what you expect. You get what you inspect." So now I have a foreman who inspects every contractor's work within 5 days. And when he says the work is complete and things work the way they should, then I pay the contractor. No one walks off the job with a check anymore, except for large, established companies that have formal customer service departments. Every contractor signs up to these requirements as part of their bid, or they don't get the job. In addition, any change order must be signed by the foreman before any change work is started. No more verbal authorizations. This avoids any misunderstandings about work requirements. In the next video, I'll share the case study of a nightmare project where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. How do you stay positive when you keep getting hit with expensive project setbacks? This case study is an excellent example of the wisdom of always having contingencies, even for a project that seems like a slam dunk. So I'll see you on the next video. And don't forget, life is good. Hey everyone, it's Jeffrey Poston again. Before we buy a rehab project, we always do our due diligence in the form of inspections to be as certain as possible we don't encounter unanticipated problems that might break the rehab budget. Despite our best efforts, though, sometimes we pick a lemon. I've had one in 28 years, and boy was it a doozy. Here's how a 3-month project ballooned into a 12-month project and doubled the rehab budget. First, it was an old 1925 craftsman house, but it had good bones, or so I thought. I was pleased to find original wood floor under the decades-old carpet, but because of the carpet, I didn't notice the sagging floor. It turns out, one corner of the foundational stem wall had deteriorated and sunk by a few inches. So my team had to go under the house and fix the foundation wall and install several concrete pedestals to hold up that part of the house. Now, we knew we had to update the electrical panel, but because of the condition of the wiring inside the walls, we also had to replace all the wiring in the whole house. But the adventure didn't stop there. We never thought we'd have to open up all the walls for the new wiring, but they were all solid masonry. We had to bust huge holes and channels in every wall for the new wiring. And the inspector made us install new plumbing to bring the house up to code. And he said our septic tank was old but adequate for a 3-bedroom house. But this house had 4 bedrooms. So we had to install a new septic system way on the other side of the driveway, which we now had to cut open. After a huge rainstorm, we discovered that the roofer who installed that beautiful new metal roof somehow forgot to install the rubber sealer on the ridgeline. Fortunately, that happened one day before the new kitchen cabinets were installed. In addition, When the flooring contractor came out to install the new wood floor, nobody had mentioned that the installers would have to float the whole kitchen, living room, and dining rooms to make it level first. So that added another $20,000 to the rehab budget. Now, throughout all this, the contractor was having some family issues and half his crew left the job. One day I showed up on the job site to see one of the carpenters building the laundry room wall without a door. When I called him on it, he put in a door, but it was too small to get the appliances in and it was too close to the water heater. The next day I showed up to find the yard workers taping and texturing drywall, so I just fired the whole crew. The new contractor had to fix numerous mistakes and retexture all the interior walls. Despite all this, we still could have made a modest profit, but then the final straw happened. A new development broke ground right up the street and capped our potential sale price. Had we been able to stick to the rehab budget and schedule, we would have sold our project before that new development even got their permits. So in the end, we were on track to lose $50,000 or minus 9% ROI. But I managed to get my investors out of the project with a positive 10% ROI through a creative 1031 exchange that I discussed in a previous video. In summary, you can pretty much count on one or two setbacks in any given project. And as long as you're well capitalized and have contingency plans, you'll probably pull through without serious impact to your profit. But when you get that once in 30 years project when everything that can go wrong does go wrong, sometimes all you can do is grin and bear it and do the best you can. In the next video, I'll share a lesson that I learned in the arena of financing a project with an obstinate private lender. There were obstacles in understanding and communication before the project started, and those problems trickled all the way through until the end of the project, and there were plenty of red flags that I should have seen but didn't. So I'll see you on the next video. And don't forget, life is good. Hey everyone, it's Jeffrey Poston again. At some point in your investment career, if you turn to OPM, other people's money, you'll likely talk to a private lender or hard money lender. Some are nice and some are cutthroat. And some are cutthroat but make a big show of being nice. At the end of the day, though, this is business, and we can't afford to give lenders any points for being nice. The details are all in the lien, promissory note, and guarantee that get recorded on a property. And my opinion is that a private lender's docs should never be more detailed or more restrictive than a first lien, which is typically issued from a bank. If your private lender's docs are exceedingly restrictive, this is a red flag. Equity investors tend to be easier to get along with because after they get to know you and learn to like you and trust you, they actually want to invest with you. Besides, as passive investors, the operating agreement gives them only limited rights, so your trustworthiness is essential. On the other hand, private lenders tend to be more business-oriented. They want a return on their money, and they want security in the form of a lien on your property. Most private lenders have been in the business a while, and they have loan docs similar to those of banks. But there's a big difference between banks and private lenders. Banks qualify you for a loan you the money, record a lien on your property, and then you don't hear from them again unless you miss your monthly payment. Private lenders often try to be more proactive and more participatory in projects, especially if they feel they have leverage over you or doubt your experience. Granted, a second lien position isn't as powerful as a first, but you should always push back against private lenders who want control over your project. I've covered this in a previous video, and I've always said there can only be one bus driver. If you have to get clearance from someone else, then you're not in control of your project. They are. And if you have other equity investors involved in the project who are trusting you to bring their ROI, then you're in conflict now because their ROI is no longer solely up to you. Aggressive private lenders might ask things like the following: visibility to the bank account, approval over contractor bids, periodic site visits. While these things may seem harmless enough individually, ask yourself, why would someone ask for these privileges unless they intend to use them? And if those terms are in their loan docs and you sign them, you are literally giving them leverage and control over your project, and you must then abide by the conditions. What is potentially more dangerous from a project management perspective is a private lender who seems nice and agreeable and on your side until he or she begins to assert control or authority. Then you may find yourself in conflict over control of the project. Here's what happened to me. I met with an investor about a project, and we had a real nice discussion. I answered all his questions about how I manage projects. He was very agreeable and supportive, and he decided he would rather be a lender on the project instead of an equity investor. He sent over his docs, which I reviewed. I questioned his need to view the bank account, but he said this was a mere formality, and since he was a major investor, I figured it was no big deal. In reality, this was red flag number 1. One day before closing, he disclosed that he needed 2 installments to deliver his capital. This was red flag number 2 because he obviously knew ahead of time all his money wasn't accessible. Nevertheless, we agreed he would send over 2/3 of his funds at closing and the remaining 1/3 in 2 weeks. But 2 weeks turned into 6 weeks. Red flag number 3. We finished the rehab and started the refinance process, and that's when he started asking questions. And you know, in any negotiation, whoever is asking the questions has the power. He asked for paper copies of all contractor bids and paper copies of every check and electronic transaction going back to the beginning of the project. Red flag number 4. Well, you know me, I'm more stubborn than most, so I refused to provide the data for 2 reasons. 1, it would have taken too much of my time, and 2, it would only open up more questions, because I learned very quickly that there was never enough information to satisfy this person. So then he started asking questions that an attorney would ask. For example, will you provide this and that, as stated in paragraph such and such of document so-and-so? Red flag number 5. And he was refusing to sign his deed release for the refinance, so I brought out the nuclear bomb. I told him, look, you can either sign the release and take your 25% ROI, or I'll just drop the price and have a fire sale and dump the property, and nobody makes any money. Ultimately, he signed because he must have known the fire sale would be completed long before our dispute made it to court. If there's a moral to the story, it's to read the contracts with a clear head. He schmoozed me, and I read his contracts with a filter of what our conversation had been about, not with the reality of a bunch of terms and conditions in those docs that I never would have agreed to with a clear mind. I simply thought it was another clear-cut loan like many I'd done before over the decades, and my biggest mistake was that I did not have my attorney review the docs. Okay, so this video wraps up the free OPM Secrets webinar, but you'll find plenty more free investor information on my website at jeffreyposton.com. And remember, if you don't have the time, money, or expertise to run an investment project on your own, I want to hear from you. My contact information is all over the website, so get in touch with me and let's grab a cup of coffee and talk business. And don't forget, life is good.